The United States is getting ready to do something which I would categorize as very stupid. If you haven't seen the headlines yet, the United States is considering giving Crimea to Russia. That's right, that's Ukrainian sovereignty land to Russia. And so I want to break this all down for you for that, really most likely for you to understand what exactly is happening here. Because in the headlines, you read it as, with peace talks underway, giving Russia Crimea will allow Russia to say, you know what? Yes, let's go ahead. That's a good compromise. We'll pause the war right here. But it doesn't make any sense because let's go back to 2014. Ukraine was going through a massive revolution. The Maidan's taking place. Russia came through and said, you know what? We're just going to steal Crimea from you while you guys are going through all of this, in which they sent in military troops. They conquered the land. They then held what they consider a legitimate vote, even though it was not legitimate at all, in which this referendum took place, in which over 90% of Crimeans said that they want to be a part of Russia, which is not true at all. You see, Russia came through with guns pointed at residents there and said, you're voting to be a part of Russia or you'll face the end of this barrel. On top of that, Russia had bussed in thousands and thousands of Russians to be amongst those in Crimea so that when they vote for these things, it's done in their favor. It's sort of like the same voting that takes place every time that Putin is going up to be the president. Somehow the entire country all votes in his favor, and all the other people that would, be in power somehow would disappear. And that's exactly what happened in Crimea and in other areas in which Russia tried to do this referendum and said, look, all the people here want to be a part of Russia. All of these conversations of Crimea being part of Russia, they want to be a part of Russia, that's all Russian propaganda, and it's not true. The true folks who are Crimean don't want anything to do with Russia, and they've stated that multiple times to the point to where they actually don't want anything to do with Russia whatsoever. They never wanted that bridge there. They don't want Russian bases there. And there's a long history of Crimea and how they just want to be close to Ukraine, and we could dive into that in a different video. But it all brings us to what's happening now, in which we know the U.S. envoy to the United States and Russia, Steve Witkoff, has had now 3 meetings with Putin, and Witkoff himself, who actually can't even pronounce the territories in which he says that Ukraine should just give to Russia, which, by the way, are 5 territories: Crimea, Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. Witkoff, watch our videos, you would actually learn something here. And so Witkoff, in his own mindset, has said to the Trump administration officials, well, if we give some kind of land to Russia, maybe they'll stop. Now, you may have heard this before because we've tried this and it didn't work. You see, right now, the world doesn't recognize Crimea as Russian because it's not theirs. But under Obama, we did say, Russia, if you just stop at Crimea, we can hit the reset. And, we can maybe put that on pause for now. You hold on to Crimea and we'll see how things go. That eventually led up through Obama, through Trump, through Biden, up to a full-scale invasion, which was supposed to happen actually during the pandemic under Trump, but because of the pandemic, it was pushed back to 2022. That being said, not one country in the world recognizes Crimea as Russian. And now we're seeing the United States potentially trying to put forward this idea of look, the world doesn't recognize it, but if we say it is Russian, then the world's going to have to, which, if is the case, the United States saying that it is Russian, will put a major divide between the United States and our allies, since every other ally is going to be like, oh, no, we're not trying to reward Russia for the bloodshed and the horrible things they've done to the Ukrainian people. Under the Ukrainian constitution and the constitution of their own in actual Crimea, They are with Ukraine. They are partnered up with Ukraine, not Russia. And we must adhere to their constitution and the will and the way the real Crimeans feel about what's happening in their own territory. And so from day one, Zelensky said that we're not giving up these territories. These territories are Ukrainian. They've always wanted to be Ukrainian, and so they are Ukrainian. And we're even seeing Zelensky say this today to reporters, where we'll quote him where he says, "There is nothing to talk about. This violates our constitution. This is our territory, the territory of the people of Ukraine." And interestingly enough, Russian officials actually know this, because we have heard in the past Russian officials say it's one thing for us to come in, but Ukraine would have to change their constitution in order for that land to actually be a part of Russia. And Ukraine has absolutely no mindset whatsoever that they want to do this. With Zelensky later on saying, as soon as talks about Crimea and our sovereign territories begin, the talks enter the format of Russia wants, prolonging the war, because it would not be possible to agree on everything quickly. We know these signals are sounding and will continue to sound, saying whether or not this mindset of making this Russian is coming from Russian propaganda, which is then spread through U.S. officials to other U.S. officials, which then are then put forward. But what we do know is this: giving Russia land, giving them things that they had illegally taken after killing a lot of people. This is not the right thing to do, as Russia is the aggressor here and Ukraine is the victim. And I think that's what the administration in the U.S. keeps on forgetting, is that sure, you and I, we both want this war to end. Believe you me, I want it to end. I've lost friends and family. We're losing more friends and family. It's horrible about what's happening here, but it needs to be done in a way so that it never happens again. And there's no reason to punish Ukraine, because Ukraine didn't start this. It was Russia who started this. And look, I know Donald Trump does say, well, it's Zelensky's fault and it is Biden's fault, but it's not. It all started even before 2014. If you want to point fingers, we can point to the last three administrations: Obama, then Trump, then Biden, and then Trump again. Because ultimately, it was a combination of many different things that spiraled up without the U.S. actually stepping in to do something. We did the reset button under Obama. It didn't work. Under Trump, nothing really happened. Sure, we gave them javelins, but that was about it. There were no constructive conversations. And remember, under Trump's first term, Russia was building up all the weapons, all the equipment, doing the trainings for the men, moving into Belarus and getting set to do this war, and which was supposed to happen in 2020. The pandemic happened. It got pushed back to 2022. Which leads us back to the main point here. To have Steve Witkoff come from Putin multiple times, and every single time Putin's saying we're not giving up we're doing exactly what we want from day one, we're seeing the United States essentially say to Ukraine, hey, look, they're not letting anything down. It would be better for us to bully you, so that way we can get some kind of peace here. And like I've said before, we've tried this and it didn't work. So if the United States does move forward with recognizing Crimea as part of Russia, it's going to be opening up a can of worms which the United States really cannot open at this time, especially because at this very moment, we are super weak as a country, especially because we don't really have many allies who are willing to stick up for us. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comment section below. Please do share, like, and comment anything you have. If you have any questions in the comment section. And as always, I'll see you later.